Welcome to Dead Quiet Mysteries, the place where every cold case, chilling crime, and unsolved mystery is brought back to life. From vanished persons to twisted betrayals, we dig deep into the unknown to uncover the truth that others left buried. Before we begin, drop a comment and tell us which city and country you're watching from. We love seeing how far the mystery travels. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell icon so you never miss a case. Because here, some truths are only heard in the dead quiet. Hercule Poirot and Whispers in the Kingsward Edge. Chapter 1. A Holiday. Interrupted. It was not, Hercule Poirot reflected, the sort of place he would have chosen for a holiday. Too many rocks, too much wind. And the sea, beautiful, yes, but turbulent and unpredictable. But the invitation had come from the concierge of the Hôtel du Lac in Geneva, who owed Poirot a favour and had suggested Kingsward Edge Hotel with quiet insistence. Discreet, exclusive. English countryside, monsieur, but with standards that do not disgrace a gentleman of taste. And so here he was, his small valise neatly arranged in the trunk, his patent leather shoes polished to perfection, seated in a motor car weaving its way through narrow, ivy-covered lanes that led to the southern coast of England. As the car crested the final hill, Kingsward Edge came into view. The hotel stood alone at the lip of a great cliff. Built in the early Georgian style, it had the solemn dignity of a house accustomed to secrets. Below it, the sea battered the jagged rocks, and behind it stretched wind-scoured hills and the faint outline of a disused lighthouse. The very air carried salt and silence. The driver, a taciturn man in his 50s, offered a rare opinion. "Weather can turn cruel quick up here, sir. Kingsward's a lonely place. Locals say the Edge listens." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Écoutez bien, monsieur. It is not the landscape that listens, but the people who do not speak." The driver chuckled nervously. "If you say so, sir." They pulled up to the entrance. A young porter rushed forward with the efficiency of someone who had never been hurried. Poirot emerged, immaculate in a light grey suit with a pale blue cravat, his shoes unblemished despite the gravel. He surveyed the hotel's facade with interest. Wisteria climbed one side of the old stone, and brass letters above the arched door spelled Kingsward Edge Hotel in dignified restraint. Inside, a crackling fire gave warmth to a vast parlour lined with old books and sea charts. Above the mantel hung a portrait of a naval officer with hard eyes and impeccable sideburns. The air smelled faintly of lavender polish and something subtler, seaweed perhaps, or secrecy. Mrs. Honoria Treadgold, the proprietress, greeted Poirot with regal reserve. She was a tall woman in her 60s, with steely grey hair pulled into a severe bun and a voice cultivated in Cheltenham drawing rooms. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, offering a hand encased in a pearl glove, "it is a pleasure to welcome you to Kingsward Edge. You will find peace here, I hope. We have no telephones in the rooms by design." "Mais c'est charmant." Poirot smiled warmly. "Peace, yes, though I find, madame, that it rarely lasts long in such charming places." She regarded him with a flicker of amusement. "Let us hope, monsieur, that you are wrong." Poirot was shown to his room, which faced the sea. It was appointed with antique furniture and heavy curtains embroidered with birds of paradise. He placed his valise on the luggage rack, adjusted the orchid in his buttonhole, and took a moment to observe. The mirror above the dresser had been cleaned, but not quite evenly. A faint smear to the left, not important, but noted. That evening, the guests gathered in the drawing room for cocktails before dinner. Poirot entered punctually and took his measure of the assembly. Madame Lee, the retired opera singer, sat by the fire with a brandy balloon in hand. She wore a violet shawl and carried herself with the tragic grandeur of a queen in exile. Beside her, the delicate Iris Denholm, newly married, barely out of girlhood, sipped at something pink and effervescent, laughing too loudly at her husband's jokes. Her husband, Hugh Denholm, was tall, ruddy-cheeked, and affably dull. Across the room, Professor Leonard Greaves, a botanist of some local reputation, examined a spray of flowers on the sideboard with great seriousness. His white eyebrows twitched as if deep in calculation. Finally, there was Mr. Brett Harrow, American, 40-ish, with slicked back hair and teeth too white. He spoke to no one, drank whiskey, and looked out the window as though measuring the drop to the rocks. Poirot chatted lightly with Madame Lys, who claimed she had retired due to a heart too sensitive for the stage. She showed him her prized possession, a sapphire brooch shaped like a serpent, a family heirloom, she said. It belonged to a Russian Countess Hercule. I never wear it. I keep it locked away in my suite. Sentimental value, of course. That night, after a dinner of Dover sole and creme caramel, Poirot retired early. The wind howled outside, brushing against the shutters like fingernails. He was just preparing to inspect the angles of his moustache in the shaving mirror when the commotion began. A scream, a high, fractured cry that echoed through the old corridors. Poirot was out of his room in an instant, robe and slippers dignified but purposeful. The cry had come from the second-floor landing. There, outside room 7, Madame Lys stood, pale and trembling. Her maid, Jeanette, wrung her hands beside her. "It is gone," Madame Lys cried. "The serpent brooch! The safe was locked, no window open, no sign of a break-in, and yet it is gone." Mrs. Treadgold arrived moments later, face like carved marble. "We shall not involve the local police," she declared. "Not yet, Monsieur Poirot. Would you be so kind as to advise us informally?" Poirot inclined his head. "With pleasure, madame." Inside the suite, everything appeared in order. The wardrobe was closed. The safe, hidden behind a watercolor landscape, was ajar. Inside, empty velvet. No sign of damage. Poirot knelt beside it. No scratch marks, no tool marks, and yet he turned to the room. His eyes took in the half-drunk glass of liqueur, the folded gloves on the side table, the open window, just a finger's width. He crossed to it, peered down. The sheer cliff below would permit no entry, but something caught his eye on the sill. A petal. He picked it up delicately and examined it under the lamplight. White, thin, pressed slightly as though caught in a book. "An orchid petal," he murmured. "Unusual, most unusual." He noticed a faint trace of something on the carpet. Soil, very fine, very dark, no footprints, but a suggestion of movement. He stepped back, hands behind his back. "Madame," he said softly, "I advise that nothing in this room be touched until morning. The night reveals little. The morning, however—" He allowed himself a faint smile. "See, the morning, she speaks." Chapter 2. The Locked Room. The following morning dawned grey and listless. A fine mist hung over the cliffs, obscuring the jagged rocks below and giving the sea a soft, shifting veil. Kingsward Edge seemed quieter than usual, its silence not born of peace but of tension, just beneath the surface. Poirot descended to the breakfast room with his usual elegance, his moustache immaculate, his shoes once more immaculate despite the damp. The guests had already gathered. Conversation was subdued, glances were furtive. Madame Lys, though carefully dressed, looked drawn. She picked at her eggs without appetite. Her maid Jeanette stood stiffly behind her chair, eyes shadowed. Brett Harrow lounged at the window, reading a newspaper he did not appear to absorb. The Denholms sat close together, Iris chattering in low tones, her laughter brittle. Hugh Denholm, red-faced and quiet, buttered his toast with unnecessary force. Mrs. Treadgold entered last. She wore a steel grey dress and a brooch shaped like a falcon, sharp, gleaming and not at all ornamental. "I trust," she said calmly, "we are all ready to continue our little holiday with dignity." Poirot gave a slight bow. "Indeed, madame. But perhaps before we enjoy the amusements of Kingsward Edge, we may first attend to the business of yesterday evening." The guests stilled. "Permit me," he said, stepping to the centre of the room, "to ask only the simplest of questions. Who knew of the brooch?" "I had shown it only to you," Madame Lys said quickly. "And once to Iris. She admired it, but I never left it out." Iris flushed. "It was exquisite, but I swear I hadn't the faintest—" Poirot raised a hand gently. "No accusations, mademoiselle, merely facts. You saw the brooch?" "Yes," she said, quieter now. "Just once in her room. She kept it in the safe. It was radiant." "And you, monsieur?" Poirot turned to Hugh Denholm. "Never saw the thing," he replied. "Jewels don't interest me." Brett Harrow folded his newspaper and set it aside. "If you want my opinion, it's an inside job. Staff always know what's locked up where." Mrs. Treadgold's voice turned glacial. "My staff have been with me for years, Mr. Harrow. I do not tolerate impugning their character lightly." Poirot interceded swiftly. "Let us not leap. Let us walk carefully, like the cat with velvet paws." He requested to revisit Madame Lys's suite. This time the guests were invited to observe, and Poirot's investigation was deliberate and exacting. The safe remained untouched since the night before. Poirot stooped beside it once more, observing the untouched velvet inside. He gently closed it, noting how the lock clicked with precision. The window remained slightly ajar. He measured it, wide enough for a hand, perhaps, but no more, no sign of forced entry. Then he returned to the centre of the room. "Madame Lys, may I trouble you to show me where exactly the brooch was kept?" She moved to the safe. "In a small blue box, here, usually to the left." No trace of the box. None. Poirot turned to the others. "So, we have a locked door, a sealed window, and yet a jewel disappears. The ancient puzzle, n'est-ce pas?" He turned to Ginette. "Mademoiselle, you cleaned this room yesterday?" "Yes, monsieur." "What time?" "Before lunch. Then I left the brooch locked away, as always." Poirot nodded. "And after lunch, did you return?" She hesitated. "Yes, only briefly. Madame's scarf was missing. I looked, found it by the fire and went out again." "Did you close the safe?" "I never opened it, monsieur." Poirot frowned slightly. "Interesting." He examined the carpet again. The faint trail of soil from the night before remained. This time he followed it more thoroughly. It led, not to the door or window, but curiously to the wardrobe. He opened it slowly, empty, save for Madame Lys's gowns. He stepped back. "Madame," he asked, "do you ever keep flowers here?" She looked puzzled. "No, why ever would I?" Poirot held up the orchid petal he had preserved in a folded handkerchief. "Do you recognize this?" Professor Greaves stepped forward suddenly. "That's no ordinary flower. It's from a Phragmipedium rothschildianum, a rare slipper orchid, difficult to cultivate. There's one in the conservatory, my contribution." Poirot's eyebrows rose. "Juste ciel! Then someone entered the conservatory yesterday?" Greaves nodded slowly. "But it's not open to the public." Poirot smiled faintly. "Which makes its presence here all the more intriguing." They moved to the conservatory, an elegant glass annex filled with tropical blooms and damp air. The orchid in question stood behind a low barrier, its flowers curving like a bird's talons. Poirot examined the soil. There, just the faintest impression of a shoe print. He studied it closely. "Small foot, narrow, not recent, just yesterday." Poirot turned to Mrs. Treadgold. "You have records of staff access?" "I do. None were assigned here yesterday." So someone else came, quietly, unseen, took nothing, but disturbed the flower. He straightened. Someone who knew Madame Lise's admiration for orchids, someone who perhaps planned not theft, but misdirection. He tapped his temple. Les petites distractions, they make excellent camouflage. They returned to the drawing room. The guests sat stiffly waiting for the detective's next move, but Poirot only smiled and took his seat beside the fire. Theft is often not about value, he said, but emotion, resentment, memory. Sometimes theft is not the end, but the beginning. He looked toward the window. Outside, the sea churned beneath the cliffs. I believe, he said softly, that we must watch very carefully what happens next. Chapter 3. A Death in the Mist. The sea mist that morning did not lift. It thickened instead, settling over Kingsward Edge like a shroud. The cliffs disappeared into it, the line between sea and sky erased. The old lighthouse beyond the headland loomed through the fog like a ghost with one blind eye. Inside the drawing room, Poirot sat beside the hearth with a cup of black coffee, stirring it with precise, quiet motions. The fire snapped softly. The room otherwise hushed. A chessboard sat abandoned on a low table. A set of playing cards, half shuffled, lay untouched by the window. Uneasy calm, Poirot murmured. Always it precedes the storm. The storm came not with thunder, but a scream. A man's scream. Poirot was on his feet instantly, his coffee forgotten. It came from the edge of the cliffs. In the corridor he met Hugh Denholm, white-faced and breathless. Something's happened, he panted. It's Harrow. He's gone over. We were walking along the path toward the lighthouse. I stopped to light a cigarette. He went ahead. Next thing I know, he's gone. Just gone. Poirot's face did not change. You did not see it? Number 1Y only heard the rocks, the sound he made. Poirot was already moving. Out on the cliff path, the wind moaned low and steady. The mist curled along the heather, muffling the world into greys and white. The path was narrow, cut close to the edge, with loose stones scattered from last week's rain. Poirot crouched and examined the soil. A scuffed patch. Drag marks, no, more like a sudden slip. His fingers brushed something, the edge of a heel print, smooth-soled, sharply defined. Brett Harrow's shoe. Mrs. Treadgold arrived moments later with Professor Greaves and Iris Denholm in tow. Iris looked pale, almost translucent in the mist. Greaves muttered to himself about accidents and safety rails. "Where is Madame Lise?" Poirot asked. "She retired early," said Mrs. Treadgold, her voice clipped. "She claimed a migraine." Poirot turned to the cliff. "And the body?" Hughes swallowed. "I couldn't see anything. Too steep." They waited. The local constable, a short, round man named Sergeant Evers, was summoned. A search was launched. It was not long before the body was found, half buried among jagged rocks, twisted unnaturally. "Neck broken, likely on impact," Sergeant Evers said, peering over the edge. "Oh, poor devil, went straight down." Poirot said nothing. His gaze drifted back toward the path, to a clump of grass near the bend. There was something there, a small metallic glint. He retrieved it carefully. A button. Pearl, smooth, elegant, torn loose by motion, perhaps struggle, or flight. He said nothing of it to the others. Back inside the hotel, the parlor was filled with low voices and rattling teacups. Mrs. Treadgold had taken control, directing the staff, telephoning the coroner, keeping the guests away from the cliff. But Poirot sensed it. Fear beneath the surface, not grief. No one liked Brett Harrow, but fear. It was Iris who broke the silence. "Do you think it was an accident?" she asked, seated beside Poirot in a high-backed chair, hands curled in her lap. Poirot looked at her with quiet attention. Et vous, mademoiselle? What does your instinct say? She hesitated. He was strange yesterday, tense. He barely spoke at dinner. And then this morning, he said something odd to Hugh, something about how he shouldn't have come here at all. Poirot nodded. And what of you? Have you felt watched, perhaps? She flinched barely. Poirot's gaze sharpened. Yes, she admitted. I thought it was my imagination, but I kept feeling eyes, even when I was alone in the conservatory yesterday. Tiens, the conservatory again. At that moment, Madame Less entered the room. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but she was composed. He's dead, then? She asked softly. Poirot stood. Yes, madame. A fall? So it would seem. She walked slowly to the window, gazing into the mist. Such a man, restless, hungry for something, and yet empty. You knew him well? A faint smile. Once, in Paris, before the war. He called himself Brant then, claimed to be a poet. He was nothing of the sort. Poirot raised an eyebrow. And did he leave Paris willingly? She looked at him for the first time. Number. He left owing debts and favours. And perhaps worse. Ah, Poirot said gently. So we have our ghost from the past. That evening, Sergeant Evers returned with news. Coroner confirmed broken neck on impact, but he paused. There's something strange. Yes. No footprints near the cliff edge but his, only a few scuffs. No one followed him, best we can tell. No sign of struggle. Poirot nodded slowly. And yet he fell. He turned to Mrs. Treadgold. Have the staff changed shifts recently? Number Jeanette and Jameson were on duty as usual. The kitchen girl, Maggie, has been away ill, but she returned 2 days ago. Thank you. Poirot retired early, his mind churning. Before he closed his door, he laid out a small white square on the hall floor, a handkerchief, folded into a triangle. In the morning, it was gone. He smiled grimly. Chapter 4. Secrets and Suspicions. The morning sun filtered through the mist at last, casting pale light over Kingsward Edge. But where clarity should have brought comfort, it only sharpened the sense of unease. At breakfast, the guests were subdued. Brett Harrow's death hung in the air, not heavy with grief but with discomfort, questions unasked and glances exchanged over teacups. Even the sea, visible now in glimmering grey-blue streaks, seemed to watch in silence. Poirot entered with his usual poise, though those observing closely might have noticed the slight tightness in his step, the look of a man who had spent a restless night with many thoughts and no answers. He paused beside the sideboard, selected 2 croissants with methodical precision, and addressed no one in particular. Murder, he said softly, is often the last act of a long play, not the first. Professor Greaves dropped his spoon. Iris Denholm looked up sharply. Poirot turned, eyes glinting. Ah, I shock you perhaps. Forgive me, I do not yet state a fact, but I consider a possibility. Mrs. Treadgold spoke from her seat by the window. Surely, Mr. Poirot, we cannot leap to such drama. The coroner said accident. Poirot inclined his head. Yes, madame, but so did they once, for Caesar in Rome. And still, he was stabbed. He let that linger. Iris set down her cup with a faint tremor. Are you saying Mr. Harrow didn't fall? That he was, pushed? Poirot turned to her gently. You are precise with your words, mademoiselle. Pushed implies a person behind him, and yet there were no such footprints on the path, no witness. Hugh Denholm gave a humourless laugh. So what then? He was frightened to death. Poirot ignored him. He turned instead to Madame Lys, who had entered in a robe of forest green. Her usual confidence was subdued, and yet her eyes were alert. "Madame, I ask you, how well did you know Monsieur Harrow?" She met his gaze steadily. "We met again in London some months ago by chance, at a gallery." He recognized me first. I had hoped he wouldn't. Why? He knew me at my lowest, before the stage, before success. I was in debt, lost in Paris. He offered friendship, but always expected repayment in some form. She shrugged. I did not trust him then. I trusted him less now. "A blackmailer?" Poirot asked softly. Her smile was faint. He threatened hints, nothing more. Whispers. But in our world even whispers stain. Poirot nodded. "Thank you for your honesty, madame." The guests were dismissed for the morning, and Poirot requested a quiet word with Ginette. She came willingly, eyes wary. "You were in Madame Lise's room the afternoon before the theft, yes?" "Yes, monsieur, briefly." "And you say you did not touch the safe?" "I did not." "Did anyone else enter the room while you were there?" She hesitated. "I heard something, someone in the corridor. I thought it was the kitchen girl, Maggie. She walks heavily, but I saw no one." "Merci. One more thing." He produced the pearl button. "Do you recognize this?" Ginette's eyes widened. "It looks like one from Madame Lise's dressing gown, but hers are intact." Poirot smiled faintly. "I thought so too, but observe the thread. This is coarser. It belongs to a man's shirt, I believe." He left her then and returned to the drawing room, where Hugh Denholm was thumbing through a detective novel with clear disinterest. "You were close with Harrow," Poirot said, taking a seat opposite. Hugh raised an eyebrow. "Not especially." "But you walked with him yesterday." "We all walk. It's a cliff-top hotel, Poirot. Not much else to do." "And yet he said something strange, that he shouldn't have come." Hugh hesitated. He was on edge, looking over his shoulder all morning, as though he expected someone to strike him. Poirot studied him carefully. "And you? Were you afraid of him?" "No," Hugh said sharply. Then more quietly, "But I didn't like what he was implying." "Which was?" "That he had dirt on everyone here. Said we'd regret his silence more than his speech." Poirot sat back. "Tiens, and what secrets would you regret, Monsieur Denholm?" But Hugh offered only a tight smile and returned to his book. Later, Poirot strolled the gardens with Iris. She was tense, her eyes flickering toward every shadow. "You feel watched still?" he asked. "Yes, I tried to write a letter earlier and couldn't concentrate." "Something's wrong here." "People lie," Poirot said calmly. "But the truth, mademoiselle, leaves fingerprints." "Do you think Harrow stole the brooch?" "It is possible, but the theft and the death, they are not unconnected, I think." "I heard them arguing," she blurted suddenly. "The night before, Madame Lise and Mr. Harrow, she told him to leave the past where it lay buried." "Did she now?" Poirot murmured. And then she cried. I heard her. But Ginette wouldn't let me in. Back inside, Poirot went to the conservatory once more. The orchids glistened with dew. He examined the Phragmipedium Rothschildianum again. Behind its pot, wedged into the soil, was something small and out of place. A matchbook. White. With the gold-embossed initials B.H. Poirot turned it over. Inside, a single match had been struck. He smiled. As he left, he nearly collided with Professor Greaves, who looked startled. I was just coming for a specimen. The Nepenthes needs trimming." Poirot nodded. "Of course, Professor, though it seems Monsieur Harrow had already made use of your private greenhouse." Greaves blinked. "I didn't know he was interested in botany." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Nor did I. And yet the footprints tell otherwise." He retired to his room with care, sorting through his notes with the precision of a surgeon. A brooch stolen without trace, a fall with no sign of struggle, a button, a matchbook, a blackmailer's shadow, and guests with ghosts they try to forget. He folded his hands, satisfied. The mist might have lifted outside, but within the walls of Kingsward Edge, shadows still clung to every corner. And Hercule Poirot, ever methodical, was ready to shine a light. Chapter 5. The Whisper in the Walls. The late afternoon settled quietly over Kingsward Edge, a deceptive calm blanketing the house and grounds. Outside, the sea stretched endless and grey beneath a low silver sky, but within the walls of the old hotel, tension vibrated softly like a whispered conversation in an empty room. Poirot had spent much of the day in observation, his small, sharp eyes noting the smallest gestures and expressions. The furtive glances, the slight stiffening of a shoulder, the too casual laugh, and the avoidance of certain topics, all threads in the delicate fabric he sought to unravel. By evening, as the guests gathered in the drawing-room for tea, the atmosphere was strained, but outwardly polite. Madame Lee was the first to speak, her voice steady, but with a subtle edge. "It appears, Monsieur Poirot, that you believe there is more beneath the surface than an unfortunate accident." Poirot smiled, but it was not warm. "Mais oui, madame. As always, the truth is rarely as simple as it seems." Iris Denholm, sitting quietly beside the fire, finally raised her voice. "Why would anyone want Brett Harrow dead? What was he after?" "Ah, mademoiselle," Poirot replied, folding his hands neatly. "That is precisely what we must discover. What motive, what fear, what secret compelled this man's demise?" Hugh Denholm shifted uneasily. "You seem certain he was murdered." "Only as certain as the little grey cells allow, monsieur. But let us speak of something unusual, something whispered." He turned to Mrs. Treadgold. "Madame, last night, during my rest, I heard voices, whispers, very soft, behind the wall of the west corridor." The room grew still. Madame Treadgold's brow furrowed. "Whispers? In this old building, strange noises are not uncommon." "But these were different," Poirot insisted. "Deliberate, cautious." Iris gasped. "You mean someone is hiding in the walls?" Poirot nodded. "Or using them to conceal conversation. I resolved to investigate." After the others retired, Poirot returned to the west corridor. The wallpaper was old, its floral pattern faded and peeling. He pressed his ear gently to the wall and caught faint murmurs, too soft to distinguish words. He moved his hand along the plaster and found a small irregularity, a slight draft from behind the surface. With care, he tapped a section of the wall and heard a hollow sound. The wall concealed a small cavity, perhaps a former chimney, or an old cupboard now sealed. Poirot fetched a small toolkit from his suitcase. After a few moments' patient work, he removed a panel. Inside was a narrow space, just wide enough for a person to crouch. On the floor lay a crumpled piece of paper and a small leather pouch. Poirot unfolded the paper. It was a letter written in hurried script. "They cannot know. You must wait. The truth will come, but not yet. Trust no one." He pocketed the letter and opened the pouch. Inside, a gold signet ring bore an unfamiliar crest, an intertwined serpent and rose. The discovery filled Poirot's mind with questions. Back in the drawing-room, Poirot gathered the guests once more. "Madame Lee, this ring, does it look familiar to you?" Her eyes narrowed. "Number, why do not recognize it?" "Professor Greaves?" He took the ring, turning it over carefully. "It is not academic, this, but the design is old, perhaps noble." Poirot's gaze rested on Hugh Denholm. "And you, monsieur?" Hugh hesitated. I have seen many family crests, but none like that. Poirot smiled thinly. We must look deeper then. The letter, the ring, they speak of secrecy and warning. Iris shivered. Do you think the letter was left by the killer or by the victim? Perhaps neither, Poirot said thoughtfully. Or both. The evening continued, but the mood was somber, edged with fear. Later that night, Poirot sat in his room, studying his notes. The pieces were fragmentary, Harrow's death, by a fall that seemed too deliberate to be accident. The pearl button from a man's shirt, unclaimed. The missing brooch from Madame Lise's safe. The mysterious whispers and hidden letter warning trust no one. The ring with the serpent and rose crest, hinting at a secret society or family. Poirot's mind danced with possibilities. One thought returned insistently, the tangled pasts of the guests. Each had reasons to hide, fears to protect. But the final truth, the whispered secret behind the walls, was still out of reach. Chapter 6. Shadows in the Parlor. The day following the discovery of the hidden letter and ring dawned with an unusual chill. A fine drizzle blurred the edges of Kingsward Edge, the sea beyond the cliffs now a flat, steel-grey expanse. Inside, the atmosphere was heavier still, an invisible weight pressing on all who remained. Poirot was already up and at work by the time the rest of the household stirred. His morning ritual of neat folds and precise strokes upon his notes was punctuated only by the distant cries of gulls and the soft drip of rain from the eaves. As the others gathered in the parlor, Poirot began with a quiet clarity that left no room for distraction. Mes amis, we must speak frankly. The time for secrets has passed. There is a darkness here, and it grows. Madame Lise's lips pressed into a thin line. Hugh Denholm shifted uncomfortably in his chair, avoiding Poirot's gaze. Iris sat close to the fire, her hands clenched tightly. Poirot continued. Yesterday's discoveries suggest we are dealing not merely with theft and accident, but with something far deeper. Betrayal. He paused, letting the words settle. Then he addressed Madame Lise directly. Madame, you say you knew Monsieur Harrow in Paris and that he blackmailed you. She inhaled slowly. I was naive to think I could escape my past. But I was no criminal, Monsieur Poirot. Harrow was a man who used fear like a weapon. And yet, Poirot said, the brooch was stolen from your safe only days ago. Who else knew of its existence? Madame Lise's gaze flickered to Ginette, who was standing silently by the window. Poirot turned to the young maid. Ginette, you overheard something the night of the theft? The girl nodded, eyes downcast. I heard voices. Monsieur Harrow and Madame Lise arguing. She threatened to expose him. Why? Because he wanted more money. He said he had proof of her deception. Deception? Hugh asked sharply. What deception? Madame Lise is not entirely truthful about her past, Poirot said. She was involved in a scandal years ago. The details remain murky. At that moment, Professor Greaves entered, holding a small book. I have found something, he announced. Poirot took the book and flipped through its pages carefully. It was a ledger, dated several years prior, with names and transactions recorded in neat script. See here, Poirot said, pointing to a name, B.H., and a sum recorded next to it. It appears Harrow was involved in a scheme of some sort, Greaves said. Perhaps extortion? Poirot nodded. It seems Monsieur Harrow's appetite for leverage was insatiable. He looked around the room. And what of you, Monsieur Denholm? Your reluctance to speak is noted. Hugh's jaw tightened. I admit I feared what Harrow might reveal, but I was not involved. Fear is a powerful motive, Poirot said. "Sometimes as strong as hatred." The rain tapped steadily against the window, a metronome to the gathering storm within the parlor. Poirot leaned forward. Someone here wanted Harrow silenced, someone who believed their secrets would be safer in silence. Iris, voice trembling, whispered, "But who?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Patience, mademoiselle. We are nearing the heart of the matter." Just then a loud crash echoed from the corridor. The group sprang to their feet as Jameson, the butler, appeared, pale and shaken. "There has been a break-in," he said breathlessly. "The safe has been tampered with again." Poirot's mind raced. "Show me!" They followed Jameson to Madame Lise's room, where the safe door hung ajar. Inside, the brooch was gone. "Someone is desperate," Poirot said quietly. He turned to the assembled guests. "The thief has returned, no doubt, to find something else, or to finish what was begun." A long silence followed. Poirot's gaze swept the room, sharp and uncompromising. "The shadows in this house grow darker by the hour, but I promise you this: the little grey cells shall illuminate every corner, and the truth, no matter how well concealed, will emerge." Chapter 7. The Web Tightens. The storm raged through the night, thrashing rain against the windows of Kingsward Edge and sending sharp gusts through the ancient chimneys. Inside, the house seemed to hold its breath, the uneasy silence punctuated only by the occasional creak of timber or the murmur of whispered speculation. By morning, the atmosphere was thick with suspicion and tension. Poirot summoned all the guests to the drawing-room, his expression grave but composed. "Mes amis, the hour grows late for pretense and half-truths," he began. "We stand now at the crossroads of fact and deception. The web is tightening." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Yesterday, the theft of Madame Lise's brooch was repeated. Someone is desperate to recover what was taken, but why? And what of Monsieur Harrow's death?" Iris Denholm's voice broke the silence. "Could it be that the brooch is a key to something more? A secret, perhaps?" Poirot nodded. "Just so, and I believe the key lies not in the object itself, but in what it represents." He turned to Hugh Denholm. "Monsieur Denholm, you were seen near the greenhouse last evening, near where Monsieur Harrow's footprints were found." Hugh stiffened. "I was walking, as I said before. I have no part in this." "Yet you did not mention you spoke with Harrow recently." "Neither did you." The room grew taut with unspoken accusations. Poirot raised a hand. "Enough. I myself have uncovered much, including the fact that the letter we found in the wall was penned not by a stranger but by one among you." Gasps and startled glances followed. "Madame Lise, your composure is admirable, but your secrets are less so." She stood slowly. "I admit nothing. Harrow threatened me, but I did not kill him." "Yet someone killed him, and the weapon was not a mere fool." Poirot walked to the fireplace and picked up a heavy brass paperweight. "This was found near the cliff's edge, with traces of blood. It bears the mark of deliberate use." Iris shuddered. "But who would do such a thing?" "Someone with motive," Poirot said. "Someone who feared exposure." He studied each face carefully. "Ginette, you are quiet today. What do you know that you have not told us?" The maid's eyes flickered with fear. I overheard a conversation between Monsieur Harrow and Monsieur Denholm." "About what?" Ginette swallowed. "About money. Monsieur Harrow said Monsieur Denholm owed him a great deal, that he would ruin him if he did not pay." Hugh's face went pale. "Lies!" Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "No, monsieur, it seems your financial troubles are greater than you wish to admit." He turned then to Professor Greaves. You, monsieur, have been more involved than you let on. The professor blinked, startled. I don't understand. You were seen near the greenhouse the night Harrow died. I was tending my plants, nothing more. But the footprints show 2 sets near the edge. Poirot's gaze was keen. You and Monsieur Denholm, perhaps? Hugh's fist clenched. Poirot raised a hand again to calm the rising tempers. My friends, the final truth lies in the hidden motives and the tangled relationships. He paused and then added quietly, one more discovery has come to light. He held up a small packet. Inside, letters, correspondence between Monsieur Harrow and an unknown party. They reveal blackmail, yes, but also a secret romance. The room was silent. Poirot's eyes found Madame Lise. The serpent and rose crest on the ring we found. It belongs to a secret society, one of which you were once a member. She nodded slowly. I had hoped it was forgotten. Secrets, lies, betrayal, and love, Poirot said softly. All ingredients in the deadly brew. He looked around once more. Tomorrow we shall confront the truth, but tonight I ask each of you to reflect carefully, because the smallest thread, pulled gently, can unravel the entire web. Chapter 8. The Revelation at Kingsward Edge. The storm had spent its fury by dawn, leaving behind a brittle chill and skies pale and clearing. Yet the tension within Kingsward Edge was far from dissipated. In the solemn silence of the morning, Hercule Poirot summoned all those still present to the drawing-room for what promised to be the final act of this dark drama. The guests entered with subdued steps, some with hopeful eyes, others burdened by dread. Madame Lise, upright and resolute. Hugh Denholm, guarded and restless. Iris Denholm, anxious yet brave. Ginette, pale and trembling, and Professor Greaves, calm but watchful. Poirot took his place in the centre, the little grey cells already aflame with the puzzle's solution. He spoke with that distinctive combination of grace and precision that had so often brought the truth into the light. Mes amis, we have shared much, secrets, suspicions and shadows, but now it is time to remove the veil. He paused, allowing a moment for the weight of the moment to settle. Monsieur Brett Harrow was no victim of mere accident. His death was a meticulously planned act of desperation, driven by fear, greed, and the need to conceal. He turned to Madame Lise first. Your involvement in that secret society, the one signified by the serpent and rose, brought you into Monsieur Harrow's grasp. He threatened to expose you unless you paid. Madame Lise met his gaze evenly. Yes, it is true. I feared ruin, but I did not kill him. No, Poirot agreed. You did not. The hand that struck was another's. His gaze shifted sharply to Hugh Denholm. Monsieur Denholm, you owed Harrow a great debt, one that would have ruined your family's name and estate. You confronted him near the cliffs that fateful night. Hugh's face hardened. I admit it. I was desperate, but I did not push him. Yet your footprints were found with his, and you knew of his threats. He turned to Professor Greaves. Professor, you were the only other person to have access to the West Corridor that night. The professor nodded slowly. I was there. I did not kill him. True, but you attempted to cover for the killer. A sharp intake of breath from the room. Poirot then faced Ginette. You, my dear, have been frightened and silent, but your courage in speaking yesterday was important. She looked up, voice steady now. I only want the truth to come out. Very well, the truth is, Poirot began, that the murderer is none other than Iris Denholm. Gasps echoed. Iris's eyes widened. Me? But why? Poirot's gaze was kind, yet unyielding. Jealousy and fear, mademoiselle. You loved your father deeply, but the shadow of his failures haunted you. Harrow's blackmail threatened to destroy everything you held dear. He walked slowly, voice lowering. You saw your father's weakness and feared losing him and your family's legacy. So you acted. Iris's breath caught. No, I never... Listen carefully. You confronted Harrow at the cliff's edge. Words were exchanged. When he refused to relent, you struck him with the brass paperweight. The fall was staged to look accidental. Tears glistened in her eyes. I did it to protect him, to protect us. Poirot nodded gently. The little grey cells see all. The pearl button belonged to you, lost in the struggle. The letter hidden in the wall was a warning you tried to send yourself, hoping to delay discovery. Silence reigned, broken only by Iris's quiet sobs. Madame Lys, Monsieur Denholm, Professor Ginette, you are all entwined in this tale of secrets, but the final act was hers. Poirot looked to Hugh, who lowered his head in reluctant acceptance. The room seemed to exhale, the tension releasing like a drawn breath. Poirot concluded, Kingsward Edge, like all old places, holds many stories. Some are happy, others tragic, but the truth always has its day. He smiled faintly, tapping his fingers together. Justice, mes amis, is not vengeance, but understanding. And now, we may begin to heal.